The person I'm talking about today is real, but her name's not Jessica. Like a lot of type 1 diabetics, she is still trying to figure out where this condition fits in with her identity and who she thinks she is, though she asked to remain anonymous for today. That vulnerability is exactly why we need to talk about her Tuesday night pizzas. Jessica wanted to build a life around social sport. She wanted to make new friends, but most importantly, she wanted to be spontaneous, not letting her type 1 hold her back. But that inevitable trip to the pub after a game of social sport absolutely terrified her. She believed she only had two choices. Option one is she stays at home, protects her blood sugars, and then starts to slowly isolate herself from the life she actually wanted to live, the spontaneous one. Or option B, go out, eat the pizza, guess the carbs, and just accept the high blood sugars as a consequence, or a cost of entry, if you will. Because she didn't want to miss out on having fun times and being spontaneous, she would almost always choose option B. But here is exactly what that looked like for her. She would spike to 15 or 16 millimoles overnight or shortly after eating, and then she would wake up on Wednesday morning completely wrecked by not only terrible blood sugars and a terrible night's sleep, but heavy internal shame and a deep-seated guilt that she was failing herself and her diabetes management. It was an absolutely vicious cycle. She would force herself to go and be spontaneous because that's the life she wanted to live. But then she would have to deal with the crushing regret the next day. She was absolutely trapped. And the standard advice she was getting really wasn't working. Now, you know the drill. I'm here to give you education. I'm not your doctor. What we discuss here is a strategy framework. It's not a medical prescription. But if you want to know exactly how we broke this cycle for Jess, here's what we did. I want you to know that Jess is smart. She'd done the online learning, the research. She tried standard 50-50 split bowlers purely based on her normal carb count. But it failed. What she was missing is that a massive dose of fat creates a perfect storm in your biology that does two very specific things. First, a huge volume of fat causes significant and temporary insulin resistance. Your body suddenly needs much more insulin to do the exact same job that it would normally do. And second, that fat acts like a roadblock in your stomach, which drastically delays digestion. All this means is that the carbohydrates from the pizza do not hit your bloodstream immediately, they trickle in hours later. The bottom line is this: Jess's rapid-acting insulin was peaking while the pizza was still sitting in her stomach. On a CGM, you feel like a hero for the first 2 or 3 hours with a lovely, perfect flat line or maybe just a couple wavy bits. After that, though, there is this terrifying, stubborn spike that absolutely refuses to come down, and it feels like will never come down regardless of how many corrections you give. If you take this problem to a clinic that's really up to date with the research, they might hand you an academic equation, something like the fat protein unit, sometimes called the Warsaw method, or the carb equivalent method. These are both different ways of accounting for fat and protein in your insulin bolusing, so not just focusing on carbs. The danger here is twofold, in that doing complex algebra at the pub ruins your spontaneity, which is what Jess wanted in the first place, and that these formulas are built on clinical averages from study participants. And in type 1 diabetes, there's no such thing as an average type 1 diabetic. You're unique, and the way this disease or condition works in your body is different from mine. If you follow a formula that's built for most people, you're going to end up going high, low, or guessing. And look, I'm sure there is someone who's smack bang on the average for these formulas, and if that's you, power to you. Most people, it needs some tweaking. And that's exactly why we treat the textbook answers here, not as the final destination, but as a starting point. This is the only way to build a practical system tailored exclusively to your biology, and that's exactly what we did with Jess. We upskilled Jess with a 4-step framework to handling these complex meals to get her spontaneity back and get her off that guilt cycle. Step 1 is a trigger. We need a clear rule of when a normal meal becomes a complex or high-fat meal. For Jess, this ended up being any meal over 30 grams of fat meant abandoning her normal strategy of just focusing on carbs and doing this more complex one to account for the fat. A pub pizza easily triggers that 30 grams. Step 2 is your baseline calculation. This is your normal. You calculate the carbs as if the fat wasn't there. If the pizza is 100 grams of carbohydrates and your ratio is 1 unit to 10 grams, your baseline dose is 10 units. The simple maths that you do most of the time. Step 3 is where this strategy starts to change. It's the complex meal factor. Because fat causes the insulin resistance we talked about, the baseline dose isn't enough to cover your body's needs. So you must apply a percentage increase to that dose. For example, a 20% increase to the baseline brings the total dose we just talked about from 10 to 12 units. Step 4 is the split. Finally, you take that new larger dose and divide it to match the delayed digestion curve for the pizza. You might give 60% up front and delay the remaining 40% for 2 hours or 3 even. This is the mechanics of the framework, but there's something more that you need to know. So here's the brutal reality that social media will not often tell you. Jess didn't magically nail this on her first attempt. The framework didn't give her the perfect magic number to bolus for this particular pizza. What it did do was give her understanding and give her a safe, structured way to conduct trial and error. On her first attempt, she tried a conservative 50-50 split and drifted high overnight. She didn't have enough insulin up front or later on. On attempt 2, she overcorrected. She gave 70% up front and 30% over the next 2 hours, and she dropped low before the pizza hit her bloodstream because there was too much insulin on the front end. It took 3 Tuesdays of educated adjustment to find the exact timing that her specific metabolism required. But by attempt 3, she found her personal sweet spot, which was a 25% complex meal factor. So she increased her base bolus by 25%, and then she split that 60% up front, and in 2 hours, she gave the remaining 40%. Take a look at the CGM graph here on the screen. This is what the third attempt actually looked like. A steady, flat line, 5.5 millimoles per litre overnight, and she was not only staying level, she was sleeping soundly and waking up on Wednesday morning with zero guilt, not feeling that she had failed herself or her type 1 diabetes. She finally had her freedom back. She could say yes to the pub without the fear or the hesitation, knowing she had the tools to handle what was ever on the menu or whatever she wanted to eat. If you're stuck guessing just like Jess was and relying on average formulas that you're getting online, you might want to figure out exactly where your next step is for you to be able to find the same freedom that Jess has here. I recommend taking the Clarity Compass quiz, which is linked below. It takes 2 minutes and it will identify the exact bottleneck in your management. And it'll give you some clear directions or pointers on where to go next and how to fix it. The link's in the description, and I'll see you next week for another video.